Today, hey, does everyone need a stretch? Does everyone want to get up for a minute? Have a stretch, reach out, warm up. Okay, today we're going to cover, which way? We're not going to do anything. Oh, there. Top one.
Okay.
That one.
Yeah, this is the previous and this next. This is
This
next.
one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, today we're going to cover 4 things. So the first thing that I want to talk about is really to set the scene for this new device. I think sometimes we forget that the change in interaction and the way that people are going to use this device, being the Apple Vision Pro, is very different to how we use a desktop screen, a mobile screen, or even an Apple Watch. So we'll talk through the eras of computing and how that's changed over time. We'll go more into detail around the user interface. So not in the same way that Hida did, but looking at the different perspectives and the different ways, almost from a human senses perspective, how we can interact with these. And then go into the detail of interaction, okay? And what the utility of these and how we can move through these types of things. And then I want to talk about an app that we've created called Day Ahead, which sort of will be a case study for the things that I raised today. So, these eras of computing and interaction. And what I want to think about at each stage of these eras is the different ways that people used computers, had access to computers, and used them day to day. So way back in time, we had big computers that took up a whole room, and you couldn't move them anywhere. They were very, very expensive, and only very expert users could use these devices. They had these punch cards. It was slow, it was laborious, but that's the way that computers began. We then moved to the desktop computer, and we had the command line. And again, one of the benefits was that they got smaller. We were able to move them around. They became less expensive, but you still needed to be an expert user to use these, typing out a command. You needed to know the command before you could type it out. And then, of course, we had the Macintosh, and that introduced the graphical user interface, so people could see more easily the things that they were going to interact with. They could click on things using a mouse, a new device that allowed them to move around and so on. And it really changed the number of people that could use a computer, how they could learn to use the computer and interact with it on a daily basis. Now, moving away from the hardware for a minute, the next sort of era was that internet era, where we started to communicate via websites and email and things like that. And all those computers started to talk to each other, and that really changed the way that we used the computer in that we weren't at home alone. We could communicate with people from around the world. And then, of course, we had the smartphone, the iPhone in 2007. And again, it now changed the way that we could take the computer wherever we went. We could take it in our pocket, and when we brought it out, we could interact with it in a really new way with our finger. And we could tap on exactly what we wanted to do. We didn't need a mouse anymore, we didn't need a keyboard. We could just type straight away on the thing that we wanted to interact with. And more recently, we've had devices that have sensors built into them. So they can not only come with us all the time, we can go swimming, we can go surfing, we can go skydiving with these devices, but they can also give us insight into our own bodies, tell us information like heart rate, for example. And so that can really inform us in a different way, and we're interacting with the computer in a really different way. And of course, now we have the Apple Vision Pro. And as Tim Cook said, this is the first computer you look through and not at, okay? And this really changes the nature of the way that we interact with a computer, because it isn't an object that's out there. It isn't an object that we have to hold or to necessarily use another device like a keyboard or a mouse with. The computer sits on our face and we just perceive the world in a different way. So we've had the opportunity now, we've had the Vision Pro for about a month now, and we've had over 80 people come into the office and use it for the first time in our studio. And it's been really interesting to see how people can quickly learn this new interaction and this new way of interacting with computers. So the user interface. I do want to focus the talk today, and the previous speakers have talked a little bit about Windows, especially Hida talked a lot about Windows. And then there's volumes, which are the 3D aspect of designing for this experience. And then spaces, which can take over the whole area, and a single app experiences, right? So we kind of think about it that when you're in a space, you've only got one app to worry about. But when you're using Windows or volumes, you can have multiple things around you. And you can create your own spatial computing workspace. And this is a really new way, again, of the way that we can interact with that. So for today and for our case study, I really want to focus in on the middle one, volumes, because we think this is the newest and most exciting thing. We haven't really had these types of ways of interacting with computers before. So I want to show you a little example, and we'll come back to this, about why we think volumes are great, okay? And hopefully you'll be able to see for yourself. So these are just two battery level indicators, okay, to look at the battery, but one disappears, okay? In that 2D plane, when you move around it, it goes away if it's not facing you. And we think it's really interesting because some things just make sense in 2D and to have it there, but some things you always want to make sure that the person can quickly reference it from wherever they might be in their spatial computing workspace. There are things you can do that are really interesting with volumes. So this is our office. We're somewhere there. I'm sitting in the middle there in Sydney, Australia. And if we zoom out, we can go and we can visit the Harbour Bridge and the Sydney Opera House and the harbour itself. And then, of course, we can go and interact with this. So this is spatial, I've forgotten the name, can't believe, Spatial Earth, I think it's called. And then you can put an address in there and watch the way that that 2D shape changes. So it becomes the globe. The volume changes to reflect the nature of the information that it's showing. And then it goes back into that flat plane and then back into, you can have that 3D aspect as well. Now, this isn't necessarily the best example, but I wanted to show you a little one, which is how we can use 3D objects in space. And we talked about this before, but again, what's the opportunity to maybe use skeuomorphic design in an interesting way to reflect the object in a particular way about what it's trying to represent, okay? And the other thing that's really great about volumes is they can be very different sizes, okay? And you can position them in very different ways. So windows tend to be quite constrained, and I'll show you an example later, but here we've got a hospital bed in the office, a vitals machine, and then here's a little app that's sitting in the background as well. So we can put things in different areas and make sure that they're easily referenceable. Now we're going to talk about interaction. So the first one and the primary one that we need to use is gaze, okay? So you need to be able to interact with this device using your eyes by looking at things. And Hida gave a great example then of the way that we move around and that the icons themselves animate when we look at them. And it's quite subtle to start with, and a lot of people sort of don't notice it when they first put this device on. But I think it's really important that Apple didn't make it too obvious to start with, because I think if you change something significantly, then it might become too busy and too much to look at different things and again, use more of our brain power to attend to those things. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on gaze, but I do want to reflect on how much work has gone into this really important way of interacting with these devices, and that there's a lot of science behind it. So there's been a lot of research over many years by Apple and by other researchers like Ken Pfeiffer and his team who go into detail about the whole interaction, especially with gaze and pinch as an interaction model. And the other day he actually came up with this great, and in the packet will be linked and so on, a great playlist of all the research in the past that has been guided by hand and eye interactions. And it's really useful to know. And there's a great, you don't need to read all of this, but there's a great quote, or a great tweet, I should say, by Sterling Crispin, who worked on the Apple Vision Pro. And again, the thinking that has gone into the way that Apple has approached this, and the way that we can use information from our eye gaze that the computer can predict where we're going to go. Okay? So there is a lot of research and science behind this. And if we understand some of this, it can give us great insight into how to interact with these systems more thoroughly. We'll talk quickly about gestures as well. So, of course, Apple uses a standard set of gestures. Again, this is in the shared space, not in the spaces, the single app mode. And one of the things that we have found is that we tried to use the terms when we're talking to those people and introducing them to the Apple Vision Pro. But we started to use Apple's terms of tap and double tap. And what people tended to do was think about how they use their mobile, and they would reach out and they would tap the item, the UI item itself, right? So we've actually started to change the way that we talk about it when we talk to people interacting with systems, and use pinch. So just use pinch to pinch on something. And that little change, when people are first using it, really helps them, because when you say tap, people think of that mobile again, and they think they have to tap on the actual item. Whereas pinch, there's no necessarily an item attached to that, so they can put it anywhere. They can put their hand anywhere and make that gesture. So just a little small note on that. Oops, sorry. So I'll just talk through that. And then the other thing we have to think about is custom gestures. And in this case, we are in a space, because that's where you can do custom gestures at the moment. And I think one thing that we're really looking forward to is at WWDC in June, where the Apple enable a lot more aspects of ARKit and custom gestures in the shared space. But this app is ported over from a HoloLens implementation, but I'll just show you one of the interactions, right? So we have the opportunity to think in the future about how gestures can be used that are very specific to our needs. We need to think about voice and sound as well, really important as we want to create as immersive experiences as possible, or engaging experiences as possible. We need to think about all the senses. So we've talked about eyes, we've talked about touch essentially, but we also want to think about how the people using our applications are interacting with them through voice and so on. So obviously we have Siri as part of the operating system in there, and so that's things you need to think about. How do I make my app name really simple to say so that Siri can understand it and launch that app? One of the things I do most is actually launch apps by saying, hey Siri, open Mail, or open Calendar, or open Day Ahead, or whatever it might be. The other thing that we have to think about is the interaction with text input. So when you want to enter some information into a text field, or into a document, or into a Slack message, or a WeChat, how can we input that? And the text recognition, the voice recognition is very powerful, and it's most of the way that I interact when I'm inputting text on this device. So think about what's the easiest way for people to put in information. Now, we have Christian this afternoon who'll be talking a lot about accessibility for the Apple Vision Pro, so make sure you come along to that talk. But there's a great deal of ways that people can interact with this device using sound as well. So I've set up my Apple Vision Pro so that when I click, when I go, it brings up my home menu. I don't have to go and navigate to it or press the button or anything like that. So there's a lot of these different ways that we can interact with our Apple Vision Pro. And then think about the sound experience that you are creating. And this won't apply to all the apps, but spatial audio is very powerful in the way that we can understand the things going on about us. Jordi talked about the one that Charlie had done with the rain coming from the window or the fan coming from the desk. All of these aspects can really enhance the experience of your application. And there's ones like Wisp and Audio who have these really nice little nuanced aspects of sound that can enhance your experience. And I want to finish this section talking about embodiment. And again, this is because of the different nature of the Apple Vision Pro. For the first time, we have a device that we can walk around with hands-free, and that the physicality, the way we move, and the amount we can move around these objects is very unique. I want to show you again an example from Surgical AR. Again, this one's in the immersive, but there's a particular reason. We talked about previously that you shouldn't attach, you already talked about not attaching items to what we call head tracked. So when I move my head with the YouTube videos that he was showing, the YouTube follows him around, okay? Now this is, I think, a really interesting implementation. So when I move my head forward, it's like looking into something. So this is a really interesting opportunity, and I think in the future, the way that we physically move will have a greater interplay with the experiences that we create and have. Again, something like JigSpace, when you're learning embodied computing, the ability for us to walk around an object, to look at it from different angles, to understand it, really helps our ability to learn. And so therefore, we can learn faster, we can retain that information for longer, and that's really, really important. And then I think again, in the future, we're going to see a lot more, probably in June again at WWDC, we'll see a lot more ways of sharing experiences in the Apple Vision Pro. And therefore, it's really important, again, how we position ourselves amongst other people in that shared computing experience, and how we relate to content, okay? So are we all viewing the same content in an equal way? Or are we standing around an object and interacting with it as a focal point? Or is it something off to the side and that we're having a conversation amongst us, but that we're referring to the content? And I tried to put this little video together, and it's not, you know, it's intended to be a representation of where I work and how I work in our office in Sydney, and the different types of experiences I have when I move around our office. Nobody else is in this day, but I'm sitting in my lounge chair, I'm looking at some information about what's happening today and things like that. Then I might look at a document in Notion and review that, and then I might read something in Slack. And I think Apple have done a great job of enabling Windows to be able to show current iPad apps so that we can use them now, okay? And we can read a web page. But then I might say, oh, I have to get up and do something, right? So I move around, and I have those set up around my chair, but then I go, oh, I have to grab this picture from the wall. Maybe I've got all my UI designs or the images that I have, and then I have to take it in, and we're going to workshop this in a free-form board that's maybe in the meeting room with other people. Okay, now I'll duplicate the picture there. Then I might have to rearrange some of those bits, and then maybe I want to have a look and move some bits around and have a different view of things. And maybe I'm collaborating with my colleagues who are somewhere else. Then I have to reference some of the work that we're doing, the prototyping videos that we're exploring, and so on. And then maybe I have to turn the light on. I don't really, but just to try it. And then I might have information set around the place, okay? So the way that I move through the space and where I have these different bits of information set up, it is really a different experience of computing. And this physicality, this embodiment of computing is what I think is going to be really important. So I'll just finish off with a little bit about our case study, and this is our application called Day Ahead. And when we first approached this idea, we're a user experience consultancy. We do research with customers, we do strategy with our clients, and we do design as well. But we don't do any development, okay? So we thought we want to have a go, we want to approach it, almost like Geordie said, let's give these things a try and see what we can come up with. So we really wanted to focus on this volumetric spatial computing experience. We needed to make it small and simple so that we could achieve it as people who weren't developers. And we wanted to make something that was beautiful in our eyes. So we want to have nice things in our workplace. We want to have things that we can look at and really like and admire and so on. We wanted to be there for the Apple Vision Pro launch. We didn't want to retain any customer information or anything like that, so we just wanted to use Apple's APIs. And one of our UX consultants has been learning SwiftUI over the last couple of years, just on the side. And he said, oh, I want to give this a go, let's give it a try. So we came to this in this way of thinking about this small little utility. And for those of you who might remember the original Macintosh, when they first created the Macintosh, it only ran one application at a time, okay? It didn't have enough memory or processing power to run more applications. But what they worked out was, at Apple, that they could run this application, but then they could run these little bits of code in between that application. So they could have little things, little applications, mini applications that they called desk accessories. And these were things like the puzzle, the calculator, the notepad, and so on. And we really liked this philosophy. Apple had taken this approach with a metaphorical desktop of the Macintosh, and we wanted to make it a real desktop, the real spatial computing workspace of people that they are going to now operate in. So of course we did a bunch of concept workshops where we got together, and because we've been interviewing people about how they want to use spatial computing in the future and and devices like the Apple Vision Pro, we had some ideas and we thought through those, and we took those further and whiteboarded them out and so on. And then we started to move to Figma for some of the easy 2D screens, because it's a very familiar design tool for my team and so on. Looked at the onboarding screens and things like that. But then we started to play with the 3D aspect, because that was really important to us to have this volumetric approach. And we played with tools like Bezier and Splime especially. We did a lot of work with that, but it just wasn't right. And Shane got into Reality Composer Pro and started to model these things up. We went and grabbed a bunch of examples of the types of things that we wanted to represent, and we wanted to have this beautiful glass tube that could contain the information that we wanted. And so on launch day, the 1st of February this year, we launched our application called Day Ahead. And the idea is that it's a simple glass capsule in 3D. At this end, because there is no clock in the Apple Vision Pro, it's in Control Center, but we wanted to make it visual. You could see it, so you could see it. So we put that at the start. The glass tube contains your events. So you can see, oh, today I've got 3 meetings. One of them have just finished, one of them's coming up in a little while, and then a very short meeting later on. And this is the start of your day, your work day, to the end of your work day. And you can set that, whether you start at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m., or you finish at 2 p.m. or 6 p.m. And then one of the interesting things for us was, because of the nature of a volume, you can only do, and the gestures, you can only do a couple of things, right? As we saw before, you can pinch on it, you can pinch and hold, and we didn't want to hide settings for this first app. So we created the settings icon, and hopefully it balances out with the clock. And then the silver ring shows you where you are in your day. So the idea behind this, and why we wanted to reinvent this thing in 3D, was because this is your view when you're looking at your calendar in Apple Vision Pro. It's a very big window. And because Apple haven't created a native application for calendar for the Apple Vision Pro yet, you can't make it a small window. And so it takes up a lot of your screen real estate. So we thought people might want to just glance and see, oh, how many meetings have I got left today, or is my next meeting coming up? So the day ahead takes up a lot less screen real estate or of your visual field than the calendar window does. And luckily enough, we got an editorial pick, and again, they seemed to understand what we were trying to do, in that it's a helper to add to your room. It's not trying to be a word processor, it's not trying to be a car game or anything like that, just a small little application to help. And then a couple of days after launch, it was like, oh, I thought the application was open, but when I put the headset on, it isn't there anymore. And then a couple of days later, we started getting bug reports and we started getting 1-star ratings on the App Store. And it was really tricky because we didn't have an Apple Vision Pro to test on, as a lot of people didn't when they first started. We were using the simulator, but this particular issue wasn't showing up in the simulator. And we were going to the Apple Developer Labs, but we weren't really using it long enough like a normal person would, just sitting in the background or sitting in your spatial computing workspace. And so we tried to fix it, and again, what was happening, unfortunately, was when this bug would happen, it would crash the Apple Vision Pro, like the app in the Apple Vision Pro, but it was also cut off the communication of that crash report back to Xcode. So it took us a long time, like about 7 days, I think it was, to work out where this bug was. But we finally solved it. Oh, sorry. Maybe. Yeah. No. Okay.
There's an app.
There we go.
Now, Fantastical isn't the only calendar app I use on Vision Pro. There's an app called Day Ahead that I've been using. And Day Ahead is a really interesting app. Instead of having like a window like you would traditionally do for an app, this just has a 3D tube. And inside it are your calendar events. So you can see your events and when they will be happening, see where you currently are and how far along your events are. You can then look and select an event, and it'll show you all the details for it. This is a really clever app. I absolutely love playing with this. For a digital 3D environment, I think this is a really clever way of showing calendar. It's a simple looking app, I'll totally admit to that, but I think a lot of really good native Vision OS apps aren't trying to be these big complex UIs that you would see on something like the Mac. They're just simple utilities that you can just interact with, they do a particular thing, and then you can move on.
Okay, and then we started getting some, oops, wrong way.
Now, Fantastical is...
Some similar things. And again, this is just to say that people understood that we were trying to do something different. We're trying to take that opportunity to build something volumetric and take a need and behavior of our audience, the people who are using this, and address it in a different way. And I think this new computing platform really allows us to do this, and it's very exciting. It's sort of the most excited we've been in a long time. We have done the translation, so it will also be in simplified Chinese. So as soon as the Apple Vision Pro supports that as a language and is rolled out, we'll be able to use it there. And I just wanted to cover off the final key points. So make sure that you are doing research with the people who you want to use your Vision Pro application. Okay? Understand their needs and behaviors and what they are trying to achieve. What's the end goal? Not what they necessarily say they want to do with a window or a button or anything like that, but the overarching goal. Think about their physical environment. What are they sitting at a desk most of the time? Are they sitting in a chair? Do they need to move around this 3D object and interact with it in different ways? And how that fits into their whole spatial computing experience. Like I talked about before, people might move between different spaces to do different tasks throughout their day and so on. And then think about the range of sensors. So again, making sure that, like Hida said, about making sure you've got your UI elements are big enough to really interact with easily with gaze. whether you've use those standard gestures and think about how they best suit, so the single pinch, double pinch, pinch and hold, etc., and things like that. And audio as well, we talked about, sound and text input via voice, etc. But that last one is really, and this goes back to Jordi's point at the start, is this is a new type of computing. Now's a great time to experiment. So have fun, enjoy those experiences, and so on. Oops. And then just a quick note, so our next utility is in beta. If you thought Day Ahead couldn't be any simpler, then this is even simpler. It's just a battery indicator. That's all it is. You can pinch and the percentage will go away or will show. But you saw at the start with that video that you can put it anywhere in your spatial computing environment. You can be behind it, you can be on the side of it, you can be in front of it, and you'll always be able to see that battery level. So it's going to be free. There's going to be a little paid upgrade if you want to change the colors and make it vertical as well as horizontal. But the app itself will be free. And if you want to go and test it out now, it's on test flight. So if you've got an Apple Vision Pro, then use that QR code and you'll be able to install it on your device. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Thanks for having me.